And welcome back to Map the Maze. So today I wanted to share with you 4 basic tips to assist with communication in divorce mediation. Keeping it brief, informative, friendly, and firm. And they come from Bill Eddy, who has dedicated his life to working with people in high conflict. He talks about using these in terms of communication. So if you get an angry email, if you're talking to somebody and there's a bad reaction. But I actually think they are helpful tools to remember in mediation itself. So what do they mean? The first one is to keep it brief. So you can think back maybe to a time when you were in a conflict or in a disagreement. If the other person spoke for a long time, what do you think? Chances are you turn off. You stop listening, you stop processing, particularly if they are repeating statements, stories, thoughts, editorial comments, and you don't acknowledge, you don't engage, you just switch off. And that's what I see happen a lot in mediation, is that somebody will have something that they desperately want to say to the other person. And often the story, the incident, the behavior, the event, whatever it is negative about the other person. It's really about what was the impact on the person speaking. And the challenge is that most of the time, that ability to hold the other person's past behavior to account is over. That whatever happened in the relationship happened, that this is really about drawing a line in the sand. So there are times when I work with parties and they say, I need to talk about whatever this incident was or the behavior before I can move on and talk about future arrangements. And that is something that I would suggest, if you feel that's where you are, please speak to your mediator, because they can work with you to think about how to facilitate that conversation. I've definitely worked with parties who have said that, who said, look, I need to essentially get this off my chest because there is no other forum to have this conversation. It's not going to happen in court, which is mostly the lawyers speaking. We're no longer in counselling, so we're never going to have that opportunity again. This is the only place where we can have direct communication. And in that sense, it feels very valuable to have that face-to-face communication. The challenge, I would say, is that it's also valuable because this is when you can put future arrangements in place. My advice would be, keep what you need to say succinct, brief. Don't repeat things multiple times. Don't go over and over points. If there is something that is important that will help the conversation, that will help to move the two of you forward in terms of putting in place arrangements, the mediator will have heard it and the mediator can reiterate it. And if you think maybe the mediator didn't hear you, you can just say, look, mediator, this is an aspect that I think is really important. But if you just keep going over it and coming back to it, the challenge is it's not going to be helpful, constructive to the future arrangements that you're trying to put in place. Next one, informative. So this is tough. I think when people come to mediation, there is an understanding that they will be talking about data, basic information. So financial information, whether that's understanding bank statements or investments or property valuations or school choices or medical choices for children. There is a basic level of data that people understand they'll be sharing. The challenge is that people stray from the information sharing to editorial comment. Instead of just talking about an asset, there is a whole judgment that goes on about maybe it was investments, how were those investments managed, how the other person did a terrible job. The challenge is this, it's happened, it's in the past. All that can be done at mediation is to put in place future arrangements. And whilst it might feel good, it might feel like you're scoring points to say to the other person, you did a terrible job with these investments, it's not going to help put in place arrangements for the future. So what I would say is, if you are in divorce mediation, just think really carefully, is this going to help get me closer to my goals, whatever your priorities are for the divorce mediation, or is this going to take up valuable time because the other person is going to react, maybe angrily, to the accusations, to the charges that you're bringing, that it's going to derail this conversation and take us to a tangent for 45 minutes, but then we've still got to come back and make decisions about what happens with these investments. Just think about, is it helpful to me or not helpful? I know some people feel strategically that there is a benefit to angering the other person, maybe putting them off their stride. I haven't ever seen that work to somebody's advantage, because the challenge is if somebody is no longer focused on helping to put in place future arrangements, they're not going to be able to achieve anything in the mediation session. So that session is now, maybe an hour of that time is lost to helping people to emotionally regulate and calm down. Or there's a relatively pointless discussion about the past because there is nothing that can be done in the mediation. All that we can do is looking at putting in place future arrangements. That type of point scoring is a short-term win, I think, emotionally, but can have detrimental impacts on the mediation process itself. Next one is tough. Keep it friendly. I would say maybe keep it neutral. I have had people who are amicable in their separation, that sometimes there's just a lot of sadness about people whose lives have diverged, not in a way they hoped for or expected. And that one of the challenges can be, how do we move forward? They decide to divorce. Generally, those people, when they come to divorce mediation, are amicable. And the tone is relatively friendly, that if you came into the room, you wouldn't necessarily think that they were divorcing. You might just think that they're putting in place arrangements for their family. But that's quite rare. That what's more common is what I see, which is both parties are quite hostile, and there is still a lot of heat in the way that people speak to each other. There's still a lot of pain, which makes people potentially quite bitter when they speak to the other person. And what I would suggest to think about is, can you keep it neutral? Friendly's too big a stretch, I think, for most people. But can you just keep it neutral? Can you just focus on what you need to focus on? Imagine that this is somebody that you've never had anything to do with, and if you don't have children, you'll never have anything to do with going forward. How do you just get this done? It's really hard. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think the tendency to go super hostile can be because people can't emotionally regulate, or maybe they've made a decision to do this. It is difficult in the divorce mediation. It can take more time to go through the process if the tone is relentlessly hostile. And the last one is firm, which is keeping firm. If you've made a proposal and the other person hasn't responded, then ask questions. What are the elements of this proposal that you can accept? Are there things that you can't accept? What is it that you would propose? Because the challenge is, if you don't stay firm in your proposal, you'll start negotiating against yourself. And what that teaches the other person is, if I just sit and wait, they'll end up giving me everything I want. Now, that may or may not happen. It's a high-risk strategy, I would say. But keeping firm in your proposals, keeping firm about your boundaries. So you might be thinking, in order to put the financial arrangements in place, I need to transfer an amount of money to the other person. Actually being realistic about, can I transfer this amount of money in this amount of time, is really important. There's no point in trying to be extra accommodating here and say, I can try to make that work, because at the end of the day, you will have a court order that says you're going to do this. And so you need to make sure that you are firm in the principles that you need to abide by. Is this realistic for me to do? Is it practicable for me to get there every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 2 p.m.? I don't know. But as a person, you will know that. So you need to be communicating those boundaries in a way that is clear and firm, so that the other person and the mediator can both understand what the limitations are to any arrangements that can be put in place. So, to recap, for effective divorce mediation communication, some basic rules. Keep it brief. Do not keep going into the lengthy story. Keep it informative. So focus on the data. Don't focus on the editorial. Keep it friendly, ideally, but generally just keep it neutral. Make sure that you are focused on what your goals are, not on scoring points, and keep it firm. Be realistic about what it is that you can do and cannot do in the mediation negotiations so that you can ensure that the arrangements that are put in place are realistic. Okay, something to think about. Have a good week and take care.